Welcome to this Clinical Explainer. Today, we are totally reframing ADHD. We're going to look right past the standard textbook view of clinical deficits and neurobiological errors, and instead, we're examining it through a really profound evolutionary lens. We're going to explore a completely game-changing concept called the sentinel hypothesis. I want you to think about a massive evolutionary paradox right out of the gate. If ADHD is purely a deleterious disorder, basically a biological malfunction, why on earth does it consistently affect roughly 4% of the entire human population? As medical professionals, you know that pure genetic deficits that cause genuine impairment simply do not persist at such incredibly high, stable rates globally. Nature just isn't that careless. So, here's our roadmap for today's briefing. We'll hit the ADHD paradox, introduce the sentinel hypothesis, examine the modern evolutionary mismatch, look at the mathematics of survival, and finally, bring it all directly back into your everyday clinical practice. All right, kicking things off with part 1, the ADHD paradox. When you look at the epidemiological data, the sheer consistency is honestly staggering. We're talking a rock-solid 3 to 5% prevalence across wildly different cultures and geographies, and it has persisted for literally millennia. Now, the inescapable conclusion from basic evolutionary biology is this. If a trait sticks around at this high of a frequency for that long, it is not an accident. There's no way. It means these exact cognitive configurations absolutely offered a distinct survival advantage to early human groups. Which brings us to section 2, the sentinel hypothesis. So, what is the sentinel hypothesis? Well, it's this brilliant core theory that elegantly explains our paradox. It argues that the cognitive traits we cluster together and diagnose as ADHD today are actually the population-level signature of a highly adaptive ancestral role. To put it bluntly, the ancestors of the patients sitting in your waiting room, they were the crucial threat detectors for their nomadic tribes. They were the sentinels. Let's completely reframe the clinical profile for a second. What we constantly pathologize today as distractibility is actually an incredibly low threshold for detecting new stimuli. Hyperactivity? That's just a rapid physical orientation to an anomaly in the environment. And lack of focus is, in reality, a constant life-saving scanning mechanism. Think about it. A good sentinel naturally accepts a really high rate of false alarms, right? Because springing into action over a snapped twig is cheap, but missing a real predator is fatal. Acting rapidly before sitting down to slowly deliberate was literally a survival superpower. So, moving right into part 3, the modern evolutionary mismatch. Okay, if this wiring was such a massive advantage back then, why does it cause so much genuine suffering today? It all comes down to an evolutionary mismatch. Back in our ancestral environment, humans dealt with extremely high physical threat, but very, very low background sensory noise. Fast forward to today, and that environment has totally inverted. We have incredibly low physical threat, but we are absolutely bombarded by an overwhelming barrage of sensory noise. The underlying biology of your patient hasn't changed one bit, but instead of scanning a quiet savanna for a predator, their highly tuned threat detectors are constantly being triggered by, open-plan offices, flickering fluorescent lights, and endless Slack notifications. The ancient world demanded rapid action, our modern world demands sustained static focus. This mismatch creates a profound structural shift. The exact same magnitude of a biological trait that puts someone squarely in the advantage zone thousands of years ago now shoves them straight into the real impairment zone. The sentinel's wide-tuned perceptual system is custom-built to detect faint, weak signals against a dead quiet background. But when you drop that exact same system into the chaos of a modern office, it just produces a never-ending stream of false alarms. It's essentially the biological cost of being born in the wrong epoch. Let's dive into the numbers in part 4, the mathematics of survival. So, why does this specific trait show up in such a stable, predictable subset of our patients? It actually boils down to population genetics and something called frequency-dependent selection. Picture a tight-knit group of 50 hunter-gatherers. They absolutely need a few sentinels to keep watch and keep everyone alive. If they have 2 or 3 sentinels, the survival value of those specific individuals goes through the roof. But, and this is key, if everyone in the entire tribe is a sentinel, the system collapses. Nobody is doing the slow, sustained, patient work of foraging or building shelter. So the evolutionary advantage of the trait drops incredibly sharply as it becomes more common in the group. And boom, that brings us right back to our magic number, 4%. Nature is incredibly smart. It perfectly balances the group by keeping sentinels right at the specific equilibrium point, millennium after millennium. And that is exactly why roughly 4% of the human population inherits this precise neurobiology today. Bringing it all home with Part 5, Clinical Practice Applications. The million-dollar question: how does all of this evolutionary theory actually change what you do in the exam room tomorrow morning? Well, recognizing this evolutionary origin does not mean we just ignore the modern suffering. The impairment these patients face today is very real, and we absolutely must treat it. But we need a convergent, highly personalized diagnostic approach. By blending a detailed clinical history with psychometrics and even emerging biomarkers like EEG, we can pinpoint the exact intersection where the modern environment is actively failing the patient's biology. From there, we can select the most precise intervention, whether that's a stimulant or a non-stimulant, to actually help them function. Here is our clinical game plan. In 3 steps, it's all about treating the suffering while actively preserving the sentinel. Step 1. Alleviate that modern impairment. We have to tackle the profound emotional dysregulation and the functional blockades holding them back. But step 2 is absolutely vital. We have to use highly calibrated treatments that preserve the core sentinel traits so they can be leveraged constructively today. We really want to protect their unique creativity, their rapid pattern recognition, and their incredible capacity for hyperfocus. The right medication should quiet the noise, it shouldn't extinguish the patient's unique cognitive style. And then there's step 3, reconstructing the narrative. This narrative reconstruction, this is where you as a clinician become truly transformative. You have to actively help your patients reframe what feels like a lifetime of perceived failures. Think about your late diagnosed adults. They've often spent decades believing their inconsistent performance was just a moral failing or a lack of personal discipline. You get to explain to them that their acute rejection sensitivity and their distractibility, those are biological features of an environmental mismatch, not deep-seated character flaws. You are quite literally helping them rebuild their identity using biological truth. Because let's be real, just handing a patient a pill is never enough. As this quote perfectly highlights, a patient who has spent 30 or 40 years with a specific negative self-understanding can't just suddenly rewrite their life story the second a medication kicks in. We owe these modern-day sentinels deliberate, sustained therapeutic engagement. We have to help them completely rewrite their internal narrative so they can finally thrive in a world they weren't originally built for. So I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought to chew on. The next time an ADHD patient sits down in your clinic, are you just treating another disorder? Or are you actually helping a sentinel adapt to the modern world?